Yeah, I suppose sometimes podcasting is like believing that you're there, which is kind of a bit odd if you think about it. It's like believing in gods and believing in mentor deities. So if you can imagine me sitting in my studio and I'm lighting icons or I'm lighting candles in front of icons and then I'm putting little water bowls in front of Buddhas, and you'd say that fella's not well, and then he gets out a microphone and he starts talking to nobody. There's nobody in the room, and there he is talking to you. Now you could say he's not well in the head, and you'd be fairly correct, because there's two things I would like to say about podcasting. The first is that I think the podcast has emerged in the past 5 years as a new form of the essay. The essay was a really important literary form, maybe in the 18th century. It was a masterful way of voicing an opinion or an idea, but by voicing the opinion or idea, you were kind of showing who you are. Because how do you know who I am unless I tell you something? I can tell you something like my whole CV and where I came from and my biography, but that doesn't really tell you as much about me as if I share stories with you. If I told you the story of growing up in Cavan, or if I told you the story of living in Leitrim, then you begin to know who I am through the stories. You know the kind of person I am. I'm kind of taking off the mask and showing you the real me. And the essay, I think, was a way of doing that. So people would write essays about various ideas or philosophical issues, or some beautiful essay writers would write about flowers or gardening or walking. And it emerged as a literary style, the essay. The same as a novel embodies a sense of what it is to be human. So the essay was embodying what it is to be human, not because of the content, but because of the style, because of the way it was written. So when you heard a fella talking to you, you felt, I kind of know him, so I know his humanity. So that was the essay, and I feel that the podcast has become, in the past 5 years, a very new way of doing the essay. And that's a very good thing for writers. I mean, it's exciting. It's also exciting because it's bringing it back to the oral tradition. It's presenting the essay as a personal revelation that you can listen to rather than read. And I think some of the great essayists of the past, had they been able to access podcasting, I think they would have been great podcasters. I think the wrong type of podcast is the one where somebody is trying to teach you something. They're trying to explain something to you. They're trying to tell you, it's not just mansplaining, it's just cosmic splaining. I try to not do that. I try to do it in a way that is sharing who I am as a human being. I'm just me. And I'm confused. But I am devout. I believe in the religions, and I'm not ashamed to say it. And even though I don't go to church, I'm here alone in my room, and I have an icon on the shelf, and I have a little light in front of it. And that makes me, if you walked into the room, you'd think, well, he's religious. But nobody walks into this room because it's a very private space where I do my writing. And I'll start writing new columns after Christmas, and I'm looking forward to that. And I'll be sharing those columns with you and talking about them as I write them. So that's going to be, for me, an exciting new adventure for 2022, when I'm able to share each week the ideas that are in my column with the podcast audience. Anyway, to come back to the podcast, I think the real thing about the podcast is that it is revealing who you are as a person. I'm not trying to teach you anything about how to be Christian, or how not to be Christian, or how to be Buddhist, or how not to be Buddhist, because I don't know how to do those things. But I'm smitten by those things, and I'm sharing with you how much I'm smitten by it. Somebody comes to you, imagine a young person comes to you, and they're all kind of moody. Young fella comes to me, maybe, and he's all moody, and he's not talking, and I have him out there maybe he said he'd cut the grass for me, and he's out there with the lawnmower, and he's not moving around at all. You know, he's like standing there gawking at the trees, and you're looking out at him thinking, Jesus, will he do a bit of work? And you go out and you say, do you want a cup of coffee? And he says, I do. And so you make the coffee and you bring him in, you sit him down, and you say, how are you feeling? And he says, all right. So you listen. These are the moments that if you jump in and talk too much, you're ruining the opportunity of the other fella ever voicing who he feels he is. Anyway, you listen for a good while, you're sucking down the last dregs of the coffee, and eventually he says, I was out with my girlfriend last night. I'm doing voices now the way young people used to talk when I was young. I know they're much more articulate now and much more educated. But anyway, they do have the same inarticulate problem, particularly boys, when they're teenagers. And anyway, you listen to him for long enough and he eventually starts telling you that he was out maybe with his girlfriend, or that she didn't turn up, or that she said something to him that hurt him and he feels inadequate, and, you know, he had a bad dream about his penis falling off or something. He's worried about things. He's anxious about things. He's not sure who he is as a young boy, as a male, as a this, that or the other. And as he tells you the story of, like, his girlfriend, let's say, not turning up, or what she said to him, or what pictures they went to, or how they had an argument, he's telling you a story. But through the story, you come to know him. You're really, and you know, that is the exciting thing about listening to people, that it's intimate. You know, there's only one thing more intimate than listening to somebody, and that's physical intimacy. But sometimes even if you have physical intimacy without having emotional intimacy, you feel very lonely. Physical intimacy without the emotional intimacy can be a nightmare, can be awful. But emotional intimacy is hugely powerful, and it's like it's there as something that just happens if you listen, and it's a powerful thing. So it's a way that in the silence, in your listening, somebody else is doing the talking and they're doing the sharing, they're telling the story, and they're revealing themselves. And that's the way that I always wanted to be a storyteller. I realised that the memoir was for me the novel. And it was simpler. It is easier for me to construct a memoir because it's just telling you a story from the heart, rather than the complexity of structuring a novel and having characters with a through line and an arc in their story and a resolution of their character and all the rest of it. I suppose I find it simpler just to tell stories off the top of my head. But I also realised that I was sharing stories that in a way were revealing me as the character. So I was becoming the character in my own fiction. I think that's what memoir is. It's not autobiography. You're not telling the whole story. But you're shaping memories, you're selecting and shaping memories, and thereby constructing a character. You're becoming the character in your own fiction. This worked for me, you know, when I would write something very personal in the newspaper about being depressed in 2011, 2012, or when I wrote about being physically very sick or having a heart attack in 2018, the different things that happened, and I wrote about them in the Irish Times. I felt it was actually very, very good therapy for me. But I also realised that because of the amount of unexpected success I was receiving as a writer, you know, people were buying my books, people were reading the newspaper, and I realised that there was an audience out there that was enjoying this. They weren't enjoying the wisdom because I wasn't really given any wisdom. I was actually sharing how confused I am. And the funny thing is, sometimes when I'm at a reading or at an arts festival, I will say something on stage like that I don't really know anything. I'm not a scholar, I'm not intelligent, I'm not an academic. But all I can do is share who I am. And this is who I am. And this is my way of storytelling. This is me creating myself as a character in my own fiction, on my own podcast. It's like a soap opera in some sense as well. So I do that, and I say to people, well, I'm not wise. And then they say, no, you're only saying that now. Your stuff is very wise. And I used to think about this. I used to say, well, why are people saying, Michael, you are a very wise person, even though I know I'm not wise. I know I'm kind of nearly stupid. You know, I'm a very mediocre person, academically, historically, in everything I've done, even reading. I wouldn't say I'm dyslexic, but I'm sort of dyslexic. Anyway, I figured it out that people probably think because I'm sharing my confusion, because I'm sharing my anxiety, there is an underlying message in it, which is this is the way we all are. We're all like this. So I'm telling my story, and the listener or the reader in the newspaper or in the book thinks, that's my story as well. So the personal my story, shared at a deeply intimate level of maybe emotions about depression or whatever, I share them, and then the person who's reading or the person who's listening says, oh, I feel like that too. Then it becomes my story and your story. And then it becomes our story. The very fact that you're listening, and acknowledging that the confusion that I have is also your confusion, that's what generates the intimacy. That's what I think worked for me as a writer in the newspaper and in the books. And I just accidentally fell over it. Again, it's almost as if I was a failure as a writer. So I wrote 3 novels in the 80s. I was very proud of them. They're still there. One is called Priest, one is called The Trouble with Sarah Gullion, and the third one is called Bird in the Snow. I'm very fond of that. I was reading it in a podcast about 2 weeks ago. But even though I was very happy with them, they were all very uneven as novels. They didn't fit into the correct sort of paradigm of what a novel should be. You know, with a protagonist and an antagonist and a reversal in the purpose. All the kind of structures that make a novel readable, that make your eye turn the page and keep going. I wasn't able to put them in a proper way. So they exploded in very uneven ways, those 3 books. Because what was coming out of me was a real passion to just be human, and for me to be human, it is to be intimate and to share my story. It's like my life is a story and your life is a story, and maybe the deepest level of being is creating your story. I sometimes think I'm 68 years of age. I sometimes think, how will I end my story? I mean, I don't want to be thinking about how I'm going to die, and I hope I have a good few years left, please God, as they say. But there is a way whereby, even at 68, I begin to look positively at the idea of solitude and meditation as beginning the kind of process of shaping the mind towards the conclusion of a life. Because the life is going to end sometime for both of us. And that's like the completion of a story. And I like to think that that's a very real way to live. And maybe it's the only way to live. Certainly for me, I'm not an academic, I'm a storyteller. I'm not somebody who's trying to share ideas about religion. I'm a storyteller. And finally, I'm not even a Christian or a Buddhist. If you wanted my religion underneath everything, I wouldn't say Christian or Buddhist, I would say a storyteller. I like fancifully to think there's links with the old Sufi tradition. They were storytellers. I like to think there's a link with the old Shanaki tradition. I think they were therapists who were going around Ireland telling stories in different little villages, and they were creating and making up stories and structuring their stories to suit the people that were listening. And on they went, telling their story of woe and joy, of war and peace, in the kitchens of small houses from Kerry to Donegal in the 1600s and 1700s. Aristocratic storytellers who had lost the benefit of their chieftains after Kinsale had finished the Irish aristocracy and they all went off to other countries. Those scholars and storytellers went Shias Amask Nanina down among the people, and there they told stories. So I like to think of those connections as a storyteller, but most of all, I feel that the story is sharing who I am with you. There's no teaching in it. There's no teaching except, I suppose, the mimicry, that we all have this amazing ability to mimic each other. When a young writer goes to an old writer who's wise and experienced and spends a few hours with him or her, you're mimicking them, and then you learn your trade. When an apprentice goes to a good carpenter, or when an apprentice goes to a great icon maker, They mimic what the master does, and by that mimicry, they find their own path. Everything is like a tradition, you know. Everything is like a religion. It's being passed down. It's like a living tradition. And storytelling is a living tradition that you are part of as well as me. And when we listen to somebody else's story, there's an intimacy which we're afraid of because it is intimate. Just to listen without saying anything, without interjecting. Sometimes we interject in a story because, well, we think at the surface level we're sort of being moral, you know, encouraging them or being approving or whatever. But in actual fact, sometimes when you speak as the other person is telling the story and you start interjecting, sometimes it's really because we're defending ourselves against what's happening. We're afraid of the intimacy. Silence is just such a powerful dynamic. We think of silence as sort of the lack of speech. But silence is so potent. And listening is that active listening. That you're allowing the intimacy of the other person's emotion, which is in the story, to come across. And I think that the essay, as an art form, as a literary form, evolved because of that. Not so much because it was content, not so much because it was, you know, creating some sort of ideological position about wallflowers or, you know, the beauty of bogs as you walk over them in the summertime. Essayists were actually sharing some kind of real sense of who they were as human beings with the reader. And I think that those essayists would definitely get on well if they were doing podcasting. And then I found that memoir was a way of doing what I really wanted to do. I first started doing it in the Irish Times in 2006, really started sharing personal stories and emotions. And obviously it was resonating with people and they were saying, it's our story as well as his story. So I decided then finally when the lockdown came, 2020, April 13 or thereabouts, do a podcast. Not a diary, not like a 19th century eloquence that you're leaving for posterity, but actually as a kind of a live and intimate relationship with the public, with strangers, with you as an individual. And I can never think of this as anything but a one-to-one, as a you and me. And I thought it would be interesting to do that as a experiment, as a storyteller and as a writer, to share a huge, big panorama of feelings. And then when I got into it, I discovered that I was talking a lot about religion and I was talking a lot about Christianity because I came back to Christianity through icons about 5 years ago. And I began to realize I was talking a lot about it, and I have to tell you that sometimes the more I talked about it, the more I kind of would wind myself up into an enthusiasm about icons and about Christianity. And then every so often I would flip over and I would talk about Buddhism, because Buddhism is something that I fell into that space when I walked into Jambaling in West Cavan 25 years ago, and there's so many ways of meditating within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition that are very helpful. They're very simple, they're not complicated. And they're ideas of, you know, Buddha and the various kind of Buddha figures that there exist. They complement. I thought from the very beginning, this is very similar to Christianity, you know, everything about it. And then I realized that, you know, the mentor deity is a kind of an archetypal idea. It's an idea that, you know, the God that is within you, the one that you pray to, whether it be Jesus or Buddha, that Jesus and Buddha are different in content historically, but the dynamic of what your whole mind is doing to have a mentor deity is the same, whether it's Christian, Buddhist, Jewish, Islam, Hindu, whatever. And I learned all those things by doing the podcast, because sometimes you don't know what you think until you say it. Sometimes there's a strange way whereby the words seem to come out of you and they create their own shape almost in front of your face. You actually hear them as you're speaking them. And there's another part of you watching it and saying, so that's who I am, is it? And of course you can have an ugly side to that when, you know, when you get very angry and you say something in anger to somebody else, And you can almost hear yourself saying it, and you can almost feel, I shouldn't be saying this. But when you've said it, you can never unsay it. It's there. And that's an awful experience, and we've all had it. But there are also wonderful moments when you're with somebody you love, or when you say something loving or compassionate, when you say something about forgiveness. Do you ever have this feeling or experience? You're with somebody, you feel hurt. You know you should forgive them, and they say sorry, and you start talking about forgiving them. I forgive you. It's okay. It's okay. We'll move on. It doesn't matter. And a bit of you is raging inside. A bit of you is saying, no, don't be forgiving them. You know, hold on to your wound, your hurt, your anger. But you actually become what you say. Fake it until you make it. You fake the forgiveness. Is a dynamic which actually allows you to be forgiving. That's a really helpful one, I think, for me. You know, that rather than nurse the wound inside, when you speak it, when you speak the forgiveness, it actually has a power that bounces back into you and melts the wound or melts the anger that is inside you. I like that kind of idea. And you'll get that in Christianity, and you'll get that in Buddhism, and you'll get it in storytelling, because the stories you tell in therapy, it's almost like in therapy, you're like telling stories, you're rehearsing one single story. And the story is, I have had a good life, I've survived the wounds, I've survived all the damage, and I love other people. That's the kind of synopsis of the story that you're trying to rehearse. You go to a therapist because you actually don't have the story fully by heart. You have bits that are different, bits that are angry, bits that are troubled, bits that are tied up with the past and memories and childhood. And you actually have to keep telling it. And as you tell it, it heals you. And the therapist listens actively, so is intimately holding you as you reveal who you are. And when you reveal who you are with somebody else present, the other person is listening, you're speaking, you're telling your story. This is an intimacy that transforms you, and I would say transforms the listener as well. But the same dynamic, there's a mirror of that dynamic within every single person. Because in every single person, there is the bit in me that is listening. You know, there's a bit of me that's consciously aware of what I'm doing, a bit in me that's consciously aware of what I'm saying. So when I'm sitting in front of the microphone, alone in the room, there's a dynamic even in the room whereby the storyteller is saying things, and there's a part of me that's actually just listening, that's present. And what I say changes me. In that sense, the podcasting over the past 2 years has changed me. The one place I don't go is into that space where you say, I found the truth. Whether it's Buddhist or Christian or Islam or Hindu or Jewish or whatever, I don't go there. I can't go there. It's not me to be there in a position that says, this is the truth. I belong to the wisdom of the Heart Sutra, where it says the ultimate teaching is that there is no teaching. And the same, it comes up in all sorts of philosophies. You know, it's in Socrates, it's in 20th century philosophers, you know, the sense that things are true as far as they go, but they're not. You can never grasp ultimately the truth that you express, because the truth that you express, the meaning and the content dies as you say it. So you can never hold on to anything you say as the absolute truth. And when you hear somebody on the television or the radio or in your friendship circle talking like this is the truth, they might be talking about politics, about Britain or Ireland or history or civil wars or the Troubles. They might be talking about, you know, Donald Trump or the divisions between Republicans and Democrats in America. They might be talking about religions, the Pope versus, you know, modern secular feminist ideas, whatever. Whenever somebody really is grasping the truth and telling you this is the truth, baby, you got to believe this one, I get nervous. You know, I get nervous because there is a further double take you need to go to. The double take that actually becomes conscious of what you're saying and conscious that maybe what you're saying is not true. I think that is, for me, very profound. I'm having a wee cup of tea here. I hope you don't mind if it makes background noises, but I went into the house and I made myself a mug of tea, And you know the way you come out and you look at it, and it just sits there going cold while you're talking. Well, I'm having a cup of tea, and I'm enjoying it, and I'm enjoying talking to you. This is a podcast to sum up the entire year, and to say that what I've been doing is discovering storytelling by sharing who I am. And the more I share about my love for icons, my fascination with the Christian story, my sense of how valuable it is to pray or to light a candle, all those stuff, is just the same as when I talk about Buddhism. I'm not trying to tell you a truth. I'm trying to share with you my weakness. I do think that religion is actually a weakness. I always feel that when I meet people who are not religious and who are very compassionate, they feel more enlightened than me. And I have that feeling regularly. I meet so many people who are brighter, smarter and more enlightened and wiser than me. And I remember when I was a teacher, one of the things I used to say to young students, I'd go into the classroom to first, second, third years, fourth years, fifth years sometimes. I was a teacher for a short while, very short, in the 80s. But I would go into the class and I would always say to a new class to remember that there were people in the classroom that were more intelligent than me, that had a better grasp of English, which I was teaching. There were people who would shine in life in great ways and who had far more grasp academically and emotionally on the things of life than I had as their teacher. So I wasn't ahead of and that always worked with students. They always, I think, believed it. But sometimes, the most difficult person in a class can be the fellow who's really very, very intelligent. I was in an all-boys school when I was teaching, but there'd be a guy maybe, and he'd be troublesome, right? He'd be really kind of marking your card as a teacher. But in fact, you'd actually acknowledge that he'd be very, very bright and he's going to go to college and do honours degrees and masters and PhDs and all the rest of it. He's a bright boy. And that's why he's frustrated with you. So I used to kind of put my hands up when I'd go into a class and say, look, I know there's guys here who are more intelligent than I am. And that's okay, but I'm doing my best. And in a funny way, that sort of sharing, I was sharing my vulnerability with them, and that too worked in those situations, I think. When I talk about religion, I'm sharing my vulnerability. There probably is an evolution going on where the whole human species is internalizing the truth of religions, internalizing it, becoming more conscious and moving forward to a great awakening globally of consciousness. And it may be very, very beautiful. My instinct, again, naive, prayerful me, I always believe the future is better, will be better. I think history also teaches us that. Things do improve. Tyranny only lasts for a short while, and then the day clears, and it's good again. And this whole sense of the world and the cosmos and being in it is so good, its goodness is beyond my comprehension, and all I can do is be grateful for this moment, this second, this blip of 70 years that I'm here. It's like just gratefulness is the deepest, most overwhelming emotion that I can have in the be here and now moment, to be thankful. I'm just thankful I'm here. And I really, when I go into that moment, it brings me such joy. It makes life so pleasurable. The problems dissolve. And when I want to express it, that's when I go for religion. Because I can find no other language, you see. I can find no other language to express that poetic emotion in my heart, the emotion of gratitude, of love, of joy, of rejoicing in just the existential moment of being here. I have to reach for religion. I have to reach for a candle, a light, to share that sense of joy of being here. And once again, I say to you from my heart, I'm not trying to teach anything. I'm not trying to say this is true. I'm trying to show you the inside scaffolding, the dynamic, the mechanics whereby the heart is restless and reaches for prayerful gestures, prayerful words, prayerful sounds to express its joy. It's like the singing of the birds. Do you know that? It's like I hear there's a pheasant, we call him Arthur, and he comes into the garden in the winter. And he came in this morning because he hides down. There's a certain ditch. We know where he is, where he sleeps in the winter. And up he came the garden for his food. And he was making all that lovely noise that pheasants make. And you'd be wanting him to shut up, you know, because you'd be afraid the dogs would hear him. There'd be dogs not too far from us now that you'd be worried about. Really worried that they might damage little Arthur the pheasant. And sometimes he'd make a big loud squawk and you'd be thinking, oh God, don't be squawking too loud there. But there's another side of him, and that is, as I say, the expression of joy sometimes that you hear when the birds sing. And even if they have a kind of necessary causality that makes them sing that I don't know about, okay, I don't know about it. But to me, it seems sometimes when I see the birds in the sky, I hear them crow and caw, I feel that there's just the joy of being here now that's coming out of them. They're just sort of responding to the mystery of life around them, whether it be their chicks or whether it be their partners or whether it be their enemies or whether it be the weather or the darkness or the brightness coming in the dawn. They're making noise, they're singing their songs of glory. And I think that sometimes when I do religion, I'm doing the same. It's not that it has some sort of meaning, it's not that it has a truth. It's kind of the heart wants to do it. Same as you want to sing. So there you go. Religion is not something I'm sharing with you as the truth. Something I'm sharing with you as who I am. And as part of this big, long adventure in podcasting to create a character, to be the character created within my own fiction. And I hope you're enjoying it. This has been a summary for the end of the year. And there's only one last thing to do, and that is to thank you for being here. Those of you who have just joined and those who have been with this from the very beginning, thank you so much for sharing the adventure of me creating myself as a character in my own fiction. And I'll be continuing to do it in the coming year, 2022. So that's it for now. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.